Welcome, class, to our session on leadership. This is part of Module 7, and this is part 1 on leadership. We'll end up having 2 parts. So I usually start this out by asking a class, how would you finish this sentence? A good leader is. And I get all kinds of suggestions, and since I've done this hundreds of times with workshops and students, I'll give you an idea of typical answers, which are probably what you may be thinking. A good leader is a good listener, decisive, inspiring, smart, a good delegator, achievement-oriented. You could go on and on. What's interesting to me is when I put that down, I hardly ever get anybody give me a name. Anyway, so we're looking at how we might describe a good leader. A guy named Giselli once did a study of all the research that had been done on leadership, and especially on traits of leadership and what made a good leader. Initially, trait theory was considered a good way to look at leadership, but after a while we kind of abandoned it. We looked at things like maybe the best leader is taller than average, and then we got short guys like Napoleon. Maybe all leaders are pigeon-toed. Maybe they're blue-eyed. Maybe they're left-handed. Who knows? But none of those physical things worked out. So then we started looking at other traits, and this is what Giselli found that often people said, supervisory ability. To me, that's saying a good leader is somebody that's a good leader. They can supervise. Don't like that one much. Occupational achievement. Often, if someone has achieved a lot in their occupation, we look to them for leadership. Intelligence is very important. Now, the leader is not always the most intelligent person, but usually has a higher level of intelligence than the average for the group. But you can probably think of a lot of examples, so can I, of where the leader is not the most intelligent person. Think of a football team, for example. Is the leader the smartest guy on the team that has the highest grade point average in college? Or is the leader the guy who's most athletic or willing to, is most physical or something? Self-actualization, that's a very important trait. They want to accomplish a vision, I guess, of themselves. Self-assurance. Nobody would want to follow a leader who's not self-assured. And decisiveness. Those were very important traits. Traits that were considered of moderate importance: lack of need for security, working class affinity. They can understand and identify with the working class. Initiative, being a kind of a self-starter. Lack of need for high financial reward. They're not in it for the money. And maturity. Interestingly enough, those traits that were of very little importance included how masculine or how feminine you were. So those kind of the trait theories. We don't think too much of trait theories of leadership anymore, so let's look beyond that. Exactly what is leadership? Well, we'd all agree that Abraham Lincoln was a leader, I think. Leadership is the ability to influence others based on power, and we'll talk about what we mean by that in a minute, and based on the situation that you're in. So I would say the use of power to provide the opportunity for motivation to occur. There are some leaders that are best in some situation, others in a different situation. So Ralph Stockdill, a social psychologist, said that leadership is the process of influencing the activities of an organized group in its efforts towards goal setting and goal achievement. So he put in here the organized group, and I guess even a mob becomes organized when someone takes leadership, and it has a goal to be a mob and lynch somebody, or whatever it may be. Now, at this point, you're going to need a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil and write down answers to questions. So you might want to pause this video if you don't have one handy. But in any event, you're going to need it. You're going to write down 35 items. So you're going to respond to each item according to how you would be most likely to act if you were the leader of a work group. So here we go. I hope you have your paper ready, or pause it to go get it. So you number your paper 1 to 35, or you can number it as we go along. And these are the answer categories, which I will keep on the top of the screen. If you would always behave a certain way, you'll put A, F for frequently, O for often, S for sometimes, and N for never. So there they are. Always, frequently, often, sometimes, or never. So number 1, I would most likely act as the spokesperson for the group. Remember, it's a work group. Put down A, F, O, S, or N. Number 2, I would encourage overtime work. 3, I would allow members complete freedom in their work. Don't overthink these, just put down your first response. Number 4, I would encourage the use of uniform procedures. 5, I would permit the members to use their own judgment in solving problems. 6, I would stress being ahead of competing groups. 7, I would speak as a representative of the group. 8, I would needle members for greater effort. 9, I would try out my ideas in the group. 10, I would let the members do their work the way they think best. 11, I would be working hard for a promotion. 12, I would be able to tolerate postponement and uncertainty. 13, I would speak for the group when visitors were present. 14, I would keep the work moving at a rapid pace. I guess I'm trying to do that right now, huh? 15, I would turn the members loose on a job and let them go to it. 16, I would settle conflicts when they occur in the group. 17, I would get swamped by details. 18, I would represent the group at outside meetings. 19, I would be reluctant to allow the members any freedom of action. 20, I would decide what should be done and how it will be done. 21, I would push for increased production. 22, I would let some members have authority that I should keep. 23, things would usually turn out as I predict. 24, I would allow the group a high degree of initiative. 25, I would assign group members to particular tasks. 26, I would be willing to make changes. 27, I would ask the members to work harder. 28, I would trust the group members to exercise good judgment. 29, I would schedule the work to be done. 30, I would refuse to explain my actions. 31, I would persuade others that my ideas are to their advantage. 32, I would permit the group to set its own pace. 33, I would urge the group to beat its previous record. 34, I would act without consulting the group. And 35, I would ask that the group members follow standard rules and regulations. So I hope you got all those. If you missed one, you can pause and go back into the video and see which one you missed and answer it. Now we're going to go on to scoring these. This is kind of complicated. So the first thing I want you to do is circle the item numbers. So you numbered them 1 through 35. I want you to circle the number 1, just the number, number 4, number 7, 13, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 23, 29, 30, 31, 34, and 35. I'm pausing here. You can pause the video if you need more time. Okay, now, for those items that we just circled, if you answered S for sometimes and N for never, write a 1 in front of the circled item. Just over to the left of the number 1, 4, 7, and so forth. Write a 1 if you answered S or N. Okay. For items that are not circled, so that would be like 2, 3, 5, 6, and so forth, if you answered A or F, put a 1 in front of the number. An A or F. So number 2, you answered A or F, put a 1 in front of number 2. Same for 3, and so forth. Okay, so again, you can pause if I'm not giving you enough time. Next thing you do, circle those 1s you have in front of the numbers. If you have a 1 in front of the items that I'm going to read now, what you're going to do is circle the number 1. So you have some 1s that are circled, some that aren't. So if you have a 1 in front of item 3, circle the 1. Number 5, if you've got a 1, circle the 1. Number 8, number 10, number 12, 15, 17, 19, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30, 32, and 34. Again, if you need more time, you can pause the video and take care of this. Okay. Count up the number of 1s that you'd circled, and down below somewhere on your paper write R equals, and the number, if you circled 10 of them, put 10. If you circled 6, put 6. R equals 6, R equals 10, whatever it may be. That's your R score. Okay, now count up the number of uncircled 1s, and that will be your T-score. So count up the number of 1s that have no circle in front of your numbers, and put T equals 6, 8, whatever the number is. So you've got an R score and a T score. Now for the interpretation of those. If your R score is 8 or less, that is 1 through 7, and your T score is 10 or less, 1 through 10, so it has to meet both those conditions. R is 8 or less, T is 10 or less, then your leadership style is called impoverished management. That means you have a low concern for the task and a low concern for people. So you don't care much about getting the job done, and you don't much care about the people either. This is not a good place to be. If your R score is 9 or more, and your T score is 10 or less, both those conditions, T is 10 or less, and R is 9 or more, then you're a country club manager or leader, which means you have high concern for people and a low concern for the task. You want to keep everybody happy, whether we get the job done or not. That we're in for satisfaction of people. Next situation. If you have an R score of 8 or less, but a T score of 11 or more, R 8 or less, T 11 or more, I call that sweatshop or military management. We'll see a video in a few minutes where they call it something a little different, same idea, which means you have a low concern for the people but a high concern for the task. We're going to get the job done, and if the people don't like it, we'll just fire them and replace them.
Sounds like Trump.
And now if you have an R score of 9 or more and a T score of 11 or more, then you have an executive or team management style. This is called sometimes executive or team. This means you have a high concern for the people and a high concern for getting the task done. This is where you would ideally like to be. Probably most of you aren't in that category, which is a good thing that we're doing this workshop. So this survey and instrument was based on the work of Ed Blake and Jane Mouton. It's called Blake and Mouton's Managerial Grid. And they went around to companies and asked them questions, and then they would classify them. Sometimes they had a middle-of-the-road management too, according to what we just did. So there you see the different styles. I guess they were really good at this because then they would get a consulting job with the company to train them to be better managers. They did a lot of it, and finally Ed Blake and Jane Mouton got married. So I guess it was a good deal for them. Okay, so let's view their a short video that explains this maybe in more detail. This is from Great Britain.
Hi. In this business topic video, let's spend a few minutes looking at another popular model of leadership styles called the Blake-Mouton Leadership Grid. We know that leadership styles vary and differ. Some leaders are very much focused on getting things done. It's the task which is most important, and they're so-called task-centric leaders. Whereas other leaders perhaps are more concerned about the welfare of their people rather than prioritizing the tasks that need to be undertaken. Now, we don't know, of course, what type of leader might be more task or people-centric compared with others. We only really find out when we work for them. But a lot of research has been done into trying to categorize leadership styles, and this is one way of categorizing them along 2 dimensions. So the Blake-Mouton Managerial Grid essentially identifies 5 different positions on the grid, each of which equates to a specific leadership style based on where the position is on 2 dimensions. The y-axis on the grid, the left-hand side, or the vertical axis, is the extent to which the leader has concern for people. The x-axis, or the bottom axis of the grid, is the extent to which the leader has more concern for completing the task. In other words, it's task-centric. So you can imagine that the grid looks a little bit like this, with the y-axis, as we say, showing increasing concern for people, and on the x-axis, increasing concern for task. And what the grid did was to identify a series of positions based around the extent to which a leader demonstrated being people-centric or task-centric. The key thing to remember from the grid is not so much where on the grid a particular leader is, but just to understand the different positions and how they compare with each other. So down at the bottom left-hand corner, position 1-1, in other words, 1 score for concern for people, 1 score concern for task, is a position called impoverished management, and we'll explain briefly what that is in a minute. Moving up the y-axis, as the leader becomes much more concerned with people than task, if you reach the top level there, 1 on task, 9 on people, you are said to be adopting a country club management style or leadership style. Moving across, if we go to the top right-hand corner, which by definition is a high regard for task and a high concern for people, that's known as team management. Moving down, if you're mainly or wholly concerned with task and less concerned with people, that's known as task management. And finally, of course, with the grid, you need to have someone in the middle. The position 5-5 is called middle of the road management. So here's a brief summary of those 5 positions, and let's just very quickly summarize what the features are of each of those styles. Impoverished management, we saw, was the bottom left. This is essentially a leader that doesn't care about task nor people. It's often referred to as a laissez-faire style of management. And frankly, you can see why it's called impoverished management, because that is the kind of manager or leader that you definitely wouldn't want to work for. As we move up the left-hand or y-axis there, moving up to country club, this is much more about concern for people, trying to create a safe, enjoyable, comfortable working environment and doing all you can to avoid conflict between people. Great to work in perhaps, but maybe not so productive, very less concerned with task. Moving across, we had team management, 9-9. We went to the top right-hand corner. Now this sounds and feels like a pretty strong leadership style, doesn't it? A strong management position. You are concerned, of course, with decision making, with getting things done, but also with making people feel valued. Very closely aligned with McGregor's theory Y approach to motivating people. Moving down the grid, we came down to 1 for people, 9 for tasks. This is very much aligned with the autocratic style of management, where you are less concerned about the people involved in the business, but very concerned about making sure that they complete the tasks that are assigned to them. And of course, middle of the road management we saw was right in the middle of the grid. And here this is compromise all around. You're having to make compromises both about the tasks that need to be achieved as well as how you look after your people. And it's thought, according to the theory, that the middle of the road management position in general is the weakest of the other options. If you had a choice, of course, the last thing you want to have, of course, is any kind of manager that is impoverished, right at the bottom left-hand corner. So that's been a brief overview of what we know by the Blake Mouton Leadership Grid. Hi.
Okay, so let's move off of that and stop for a minute and talk about power. That we said we're using power to create the opportunity for motivation to occur. What do we mean by power? We're talking about social power, means of influencing, and it operates in social interaction and depends on the perceptions of others, whether they think you have power or not. I remember my first year at Catawba, I was on some kind of a committee, and I had just begun at Catawba. I was a new faculty member, and there was a lady sitting next to me that had been there a year longer than me. And someone said something that I didn't agree with, and she leaned over and whispered to me, "I don't really agree with that, do you?" And I said, "No, I don't either." And I said, "Well, why don't you say something about it?" And she said, "Well, why don't you? You have more power than I do." And I was astounded. That was her perception. She'd been there longer than me, but she perceived me as having more power for some reason. So it's kind of a psychological force that we're talking about. Okay? There's what we call the acceptance theory of power by a guy named Chester Bernard. He says that we all have a zone of indifference within which we allow others to have power over us. And when a leader makes a request of you, you will do it if it falls into this zone of indifference. Otherwise, you feel the request is inappropriate and will not comply. So if I said, "You want to get an A into this class, show up at my house every week and wash my car." Well, some of you probably think that was a good deal, but that's really outside of what I should do, an inappropriate request, and you should not comply to that. Of course, if you want to wash my car, let me know. Okay, so what are the bases of social power? There's what we call coercive power. Like a police officer, you're driving down the street and he holds his hand up and says, "Stop, there's a detour, go this way." He has a walkie-talkie, so if you don't turn, he can call in a radio car. He has a gun. You're probably going to do what he says because he can use force. Now think of a manager in a work situation. Does he have coercive power? Sure. He can threaten to fire you. He can give you bad work assignments. Professor or teacher can give you bad grades, flunk you out of the class. Reward power, that's the power someone has because they can give you a reward. So a manager can give you a raise or a better job assignment or a promotion. A teacher can give you a good grade. That gives us power. Expert power. That's the power someone has over you because of their expertise. You go to the doctor and you let him stick needles in you and take your blood and sometimes even take you to the hospital and put you to sleep and take out parts of your body or do something to you. That's weird, isn't it? But we think he has expertise, therefore we let him do things to us. Referent power is the power someone has because you'd like to be with him. Sometimes I wish I were as funny and as witty as Jerry Seinfeld, for example. And legitimate power is the power people have because you're the boss. You've been assigned to that position. And all managers have at least legitimate power. Now, as you look at that, some managers have more than one type of power, and some managers only have one. We could call it charismatic versus position power. Do people have charisma, therefore it's referent power? Or do they have position power because they've been appointed to that position? But that's what we mean by power. So we're going to show a short video which shows you what power we are not talking about.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
You underestimate my power.
Feel the power.
Phenomenal cosmic power.
Oh, I can feel it. Power is the capacity to influence others so they act in accordance to your wishes. The 5 bases of power are coercive, reward, legitimate, expert, and referent. Coercive power is the authority or power that is dependent on fear, suppression of free will, and or use of punishment or threat for its existence. Historical leaders who have used coercive power have been Hitler, Stalin, and Idi Amin, to name a few. These leaders used force, fear, threats, outright physical punishments, and murder to maintain and apply coercive power over people. Coercive power can take many forms. Workplace harassment, sexual or not, is more about power than sex. Another type of coercive power in business is blackmail.
You wanted me to do the diligence on the LSI Holdings deal again? Well, I found some irregularities.
Their CEO is in police custody.
No, not with their numbers, with yours. Applied Sciences, whole division of Wayne Enterprises, just disappeared overnight. I went down to the archives and I started pulling some old files. Don't tell me you didn't recognize your baby out there pancaking cop cars on the evening news. Now, you got the entire R&D department burning through cash, claiming it's related to cell phones for the Army. What are you building for them now? Rocket ship. I want $10 million a year for the rest of my life.
Let me get this straight. You think that your client, one of the wealthiest, most powerful men in the world, is secretly a vigilante who spends his nights beating criminals to a pulp with his bare hands? And your plan is to blackmail this person? Good luck.
Keep that.
An accountant is trying to force Wayne Enterprises to pay him millions a year. This employee has evidence that could incriminate Lucius Fox's boss, the Batman. Mr. Fox was able to diffuse the power of the accountant by removing his perceived ability to influence. There is a time and a place for coercive power, such as making threats about potential punishments if an employee does not correct negative behavior. The intimidation factor of coercive power means you should limit using it to only severe cases of insubordination. It can be an effective tool in maintaining employee discipline. Reward power is the fastest way to persuade. Reward power is having the ability to influence others by rewarding and thus incentivizing behavior. The rewards can be financial, material, psychological, or chocolate.
Fine, whatever.
Okay, we've seen
you
this
finished?
before, so let's just go forward. Okay, that's enough of that. And we are going to stop this point at stop video 25, Leadership, Part 1, and we will continue with Part 2, McGregor's Theory X and Theory Y, in our next video.